Squatchers, this is You Don't Know Squatch with Jim and Josh.
Hey there.
On this episode, this will actually be a part 2 of the previous episode we had with Dennis. What was his last name?
Dennis Pfohl.
Dennis Pfohl.
Yeah, hopefully you heard enough the first time that you want to hear the end of this story, but it was fascinating. Even our resident skeptic Josh had a few things to ask.
They're science-based, though. I mean, this is in depth, so stay tuned for part 2.
Your call will be answered in the order it was received.
And people kept saying, "Hey, look, you're just dealing with big monkeys. You're dealing with some primitive species." No. And even the woman we were talking with, the story she would recount to us, told us, "No, these are highly evolved, very intelligent, very methodical."
Whatever it is, it's not America's great ape.
It is definitely not a great ape. And in my mind, and I'm not 100% on this. No one knows for sure because we don't have a living species. But I believe they're far closer to us than anything else. And I always approach my research like I'm dealing with another human being out there. You know, you're not going to outsmart them. You're not going to outplan them. They're always a step ahead of you. So going back to the DNA, when I approached it on that aspect of, okay, let's delve beyond that basic identification, a 640 chromosome marker or identification. And we have to really dig into those strands of DNA, and that unfortunately takes a lot of time and a lot of money and resources. According to one of our primary DNA labs that we send a lot of our samples to, was a place called, I think it's, I'm trying to remember the name, but it was out of Thunder Bay, Ontario, and they were one of the biggest labs in the world. And one of the scientists that worked there, his name was Stephen Frat Pietro, really good guy. I spent a lot of time on the phone with him and talked to him about it. And he was very supportive and enthusiastic about what we were doing. But he did say, "Look, Dennis," he said, "I've got some of your samples here, and the good ones seem to be showing is, contaminated with human, but you're telling me that you guys are collecting these properly." He says, "The only thing that we can do," he said, "is we can really dig into these, but it's going to cost a lot of money and lab resources and time to really start stretching out those entire strands. Those strands of DNA are billions and millions of pairs long, Jim. They're very long, and to find the differences, if they're closer to us, the differences are going to be in that DNA strand. They'll be able to tell, but you've got to really start pulling those apart. And it consumes a lot of materials in the lab and, of course, a lot of lab time. And to the tune of, he said, hundreds and thousands of dollars. Well, we didn't have a budget for that. Adrian did pretty well financing it, but we just simply did not have a budget to go into that kind of expense. And a woman named Melba Ketchum came forward, which, and I'm not sure everyone's familiar with, maybe some of the listeners are, but Melba Ketchum was a DNA expert and had done a lot of work on animal DNA out of Texas. And she also was conscripted by the U.S. government to help identify remains of some 9/11 victims. So she was definitely a credited source. And she offered her time to help, to actually help bridge that part that we couldn't afford, Oh, wow. So she donated her time and her lab and her expertise to try to dig in deeper to those DNA samples. And many other good researchers and investigators around the U.S. contributed a handful. I'm going to say, I can't say many, but there was a handful of other investigators who had come across good evidence. Dave Pfohl out of California with the Hooper Project. J.C. Johnson from New Mexico had what they believe was a good blood sample. And I think Stan Courtney out of Illinois had one. And there were some hair samples with cuticles. They've got to have that skin tag at the bottom of the hair samples in order to extract the DNA. Because the hair shaft
I was going to ask that.
Yeah.
Like, why not just pull the DNA off the hair samples if they've been found?
Because hair is easier to get than blood, obviously.
Yeah, hair is found in quantities. Now, the interesting thing about the hair is the hair actually is, there's many samples out there of an unknown primate that's not documented anywhere in our books, anywhere in science. It shows a human-like primate, so the hair samples are human-like but deviate from a human. So there is definitely those, and you'd think that'd get the attention of the scientific community, but that alone still doesn't do it. It's almost like they deliberately have to keep a blind eye to these. But for the hair sample to be viable, now the hair is made up of a lot of dead cellular structures and stacked. And unfortunately, the cells that comprise hair are, being that they're no longer living, are only fractured DNA. So they can't extract full spectrums out of that DNA sample. So that's why you have to have tissue, living tissue, or blood from, or saliva. Now, the thing that makes saliva good is that in our mouths, when, your saliva in your mouth is constantly sloughing cells off the walls of your mouth, inside of your mouth. And so those are very good for getting DNA, because those are living tissue, the cells. So saliva seems to work, but it's not always very successful, unfortunately. Again, they seem to be difficult to extract a good sample out of saliva because it's a little more sparse.
So kind of the ultimate sample would be blood then.
Yeah, so blood was the key, and we knew that in the Kentucky thing, that we knew that they were taking food offerings. And again, we had stacks of plates with saliva samples that we believe were good. And we weren't getting a lot of good hits off of those, just, again, more contamination and anything around there that falls in there can be contaminated. So anyways, in the end, we thought, well, what we could do was try to get tissue or blood. And we came up with, it took us several months to come up with ideas, but, one of them was hanging fish hooks off a tree. I know that sounds brutal, but in the end, you're thinking, well, if this helps, the research, it helps us to sprint it forward or actually make some true gains in this, maybe that's what we need to do. But in my mind, I kept thinking, no, that's just, there's just many factors in there why I would not go that far and trying to really hurt one of these things just to get DNA.
To actually gouge flesh out, I guess, was the idea.
Yeah, and then if you guys are aware of, have you ever heard of the Snell Grove Lake situation? Dr. Kurt Nelson was involved in that, where there was a nail board placed outside of a cabin outside of Ontario, Canada, up in the woods. And supposedly the Sasquatch stepped on it. Now Meldrum, Dr. Jeff Meldrum said that he believes the Sasquatch actually stepped on that because the pattern and the size, even Nelson had told me this, he says it couldn't have been anything else, not even a big grizzly. It was the shape and size of a very large human foot. But the problem was is that when they tried to extract DNA out of those blood samples and tissue samples that were still on it was actually screws on a board. It wasn't nails. It was screws in this particular case. And the sharp nails you use for screws you use for drywall.
Yes.
Similar to those. Now, the problem that Nelson had told me was that when they had got the sample, it had been over a year.
Oh, wow.
It had been weathering for a year, but there was still some dried blood and tissue. What Kurt told me, what Dr. Nelson had told me was that the problem came when they tried to extract DNA out of that was the galvanization on all the screws was an inhibitor on the DNA, and it actually helped to break it down, and they couldn't extract full strand. But they did come up with a human-like signature on that DNA as well, and not many people have heard about that. But again, in Nelson's mind, and I believe that Dr. Meldrum had even mentioned to me that they thought for sure they might have had something with that, but they just couldn't extract the DNA. So again, we go back to the blood, and if we had fresh blood, so we thought, well, we maybe try a nail board, but again, I go back to actually really physically harming these things to try to get that.
Because you can't exactly hold a Sasquatch down and get a syringe and pull some blood out, can you?
No, you can't do that. And we thought, well, how could we do this in the most passive way without disrupting a repeat visitation and a trust, that somewhat of a limited trust that's going on with the Sasquatch, this small family group of Sasquatch and this woman. And in the end, what it came down to is we sat one night and we thought, well, we're taking food. How could we get blood from how could we, get them to take a plate of food and then extract blood from them without injuring them badly? Well, the tongue and the inside of the mouth has a lot of little capillaries, and if you cut it, anyone who's ever, bit their tongue, or cut the tongue, or the inside of the cheek
bite
or
your
lip,
mouth,
it bleeds fast and easy, but it also heals very quickly. It's a very, it's one of the safer places to get cut. So what we did is we took a paper plate that we've been presenting, the same kind we'd always done, and we took a sterile plate, and we went through the process of handling it, minimizing human contact, and handling it with sterile gloves and in an environment where we wouldn't try to avoid leaving DNA. And we had the woman prepare her plate of food as she typically does, and in this case, we went ahead and put a piece of peanut butter toast on a plate and splattered a lot of peanut butter at the bottom, and then covered it with syrup. And then underneath that peanut butter, what I had done, I prepared a plate earlier today, and I put little glass shards from a drinking glass, a thin-walled drinking glass. When they shatter, they got some pretty sharp edges, so enough to lacerate, but not enough to really cut yourself super bad. So I put 3 little small fragments on the bottom of this plate and super glued it to the plate so it would stay immobile, and then put the bread right on the top. So when these things always took the food, and they loved peanut butter, they loved sweets, they would lick the plate clean. I mean, they would clean everything off of it. So I kind of thought, well, maybe in this case that's what they'll do, and maybe if they contact one of those edges, they'll cut the tongue or the lip, and we might be able to get a little bit of blood. And I know it sounds a little barbaric to some people, but, at this point we were desperate. We felt like this was for their good. This is to help really bring forward some attention to the subject. Mm-hmm. So we did that for 3 nights and didn't have any success. But on that 3rd night, we went to collect the plate, and we realized the plate had actually been moved. And when I finally found the plate back in the field a little further than where we placed it, we had been putting food out for them. It had the food had been cleaned off of it, and what I could see in the moonlight looked to be a little bit of food still up in the plate. So when I took it inside the house, that's when I saw under light. This was about midnight at night. So when I looked underneath the light in the house, I could see there was blood on the plate. So we were very excited.
Yeah, because finally, you got a blood sample.
Yeah, we felt very strongly. I'm not 100% sure, but we felt very, very strongly, in the 90 percentile range that we got what we've been wanting to get. This, the Sasquatch there didn't always take the food that she presented, but we knew when they did, there was always kind of a signature that, it was them that took it. And we kind of had that inclination that it had been them that night. And we took and processed that plate and handled it, and then parsed out pieces. We had a sizable quantity. I mean, I say sizable quantity. If you cut your thumb and you smeared it on your plate, on a white paper plate, you could kind of get an idea of the kind of sample we had on there. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was there on the plate.
And I don't know how much blood they would need for a DNA sample, but probably not a lot.
Very little. Maybe even less than a pinprick on the tip of your finger would have been more than adequate.
Yeah, because criminal cases are dismissed on less than that.
It was a huge amount.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Josh?
Oh, I was saying that criminal cases are usually dismissed or people are pardoned because of less than that,
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, we had a substantial quantity, and so the first thing that we wanted to do, was get it out. Now we weren't aware of Melba at that moment. We had been working with Thunder Bay and another person named Todd Distel out of New York. We had sent him several samples over the years, and like all the others, Todd's reaction had always been, well, it's got to be contaminated by human. You guys aren't doing it right. And both Leland and I got upset at that because
there was some evidence of human DNA in there.
Just because when they did the base, like everyone else was doing, it would come out as mostly human, so therefore it had to be human, or it's contaminated. So Todd did the same, and he was almost dismissive of it. Unfortunately, we sent a good sample of that to Todd, and I think he pretty much tossed it. But what we did have left went to eventually, within a day or two, I guess Adrian had talked to somebody and had been referred to Melba, who at that time was just starting to work with Dave and several other investigators from around the U.S. on other good potential samples. So we submitted our blood sample to her, where she did a lot of what she does best, and this went on. This was a process for several months, but and a lot of phone calls to her, but eventually they came to the conclusion that our sample, as well as several others, came back. Now, what's very interesting about the blood sample we submitted is on the mitochondrial side, which is the female side, it showed that whatever the submitter of the blood sample here had origins that went back to Middle Eastern descent and Northern Africa, in those vicinities, and then the nuclear side, which is the father's side of the DNA. Now that's where it got really interesting, Josh and Jim. Came back as unknown. So in the gen bank, which has millions upon hundreds of millions of samples from every
known species, pretty much, right?
Every known species and every human being, or every race of human and people from all over the planet and all the far reaches, are now in this huge data bank called the Gen Bank. And the nuclear DNA from the father's side matches not a single one of those.
So on the female side, there was human. On the male side, it was unknown.
Yeah, on the female side, they were able to find the origins of our sample, as well as many others. Now, we had another sample from Alabama that I had submitted. That was through saliva and a hair sample, which we sent to Melba as well. That was another project we were working in northern Alabama. And that one came back as actually African, and on the mitochondrial side. But again, that's a whole different area, and it's a whole different family group of Sasquatch, in my opinion. It's a whole different family group of Sasquatch. But it was another place that I'd been working for about a year when I submitted a sample from that. Because we've been working several projects, not just Kentucky. We worked a project out of Texas and in Alabama, one here in Colorado, and that one there in Kentucky. Well, these two were the best. Kentucky and Alabama were, at that time, the best samples we were getting in terms of potential DNA. So, again, I sent that one in, and Melba's conclusion was that in the Gen Bank, the Alabama sample came back as the mitochondrial, the female side came back as origins from Africa. So what's interesting is that I believe it was Dave Paulides sampled, which I believe he had hair samples, and very good hair samples with skin tags. And then I think there was one, there was one out of New Mexico with J.C. Johnson, and there were several others. The best samples, the mitochondrial and all these were showing origins that were similar to ours, Middle Eastern, European, Asian, but they were identifiable places on the globe. But every single one of those samples, the nuclear DNA had no originations and were found to be found nowhere in the Gen Bank. That's the father's side, and that is extremely unusual. So that's where we were with the DNA when it comes to, what we believe is Sasquatch DNA. That's where it was left off, and that's where we currently are right now in the state of things.
So
the
human
origins
on
of the female
side, yeah, and the male side is unknown.
Male side's completely undocumented and nowhere to be found on the Gen Bank.
Now you can't say for sure that means it's Sasquatch. It just means we don't know what it is because it doesn't.
Exactly.
There's no evidence in the database that can support what it is.
As Melba said early on in a phone call, in her early on findings in this to Adrian and myself, we were sitting in his office one evening. She said, "This is of unknown alien origination. We don't have it anywhere. It's not to be found." And as far as I know, there is still no explanation, and there's still no there's no documentation of that anywhere.
Wouldn't it be interesting down the road if those samples ended up becoming the base standard for categorizing a Sasquatch? is those samples as when compared with those samples, people know that they found Sasquatch blood.
And we're not saying alien as in extraterrestrial. We're saying alien is foreign, right?
As in foreign, yes. And yeah, by no means are we suggesting that aliens are coming down and breeding with humans. But in this particular case, it's simply, I believe the Sasquatch are flesh and blood. I don't think these are, there's nothing magical or ethereal about these things. I think they're pretty well like us. They're found on this planet.
We know
they're
that.
of this planet. They bleed. They clearly do. Now, there's a lot of things we don't understand about them yet. And I'm always open to, I have an open mind about it. But I approach it from a very scientific side, that, look, these things are like us. There's got to be explanations for this. And I know that in time, and as more samples hopefully continue to come in, and others can come in and vet the work that Melba originally did. Because I don't think Melba's no longer doing that work. She had come under a lot of scrutiny and fire for it. And unjustifiably so in many cases. I mean, there's some things that she probably could have done differently, but I'm not going to judge that. That's not my field of expertise. Yes, I was disappointed in the way some things were handled, obviously.
But it's hard to argue with the actual DNA evidence.
You can't argue with the actual DNA evidence. It's there. The papers that she submitted were actually vetted by peers in her group, and they said, yes, there is something there. But for some strange reason, this has been kind of buried and dismissed by the scientific community at large.
Yeah.
They continue to reject it, and they make up any little excuse or chink in the armor they can find to dismiss the entirety of the evidence that she has there. You can't dispute that. It's been peer-reviewed by others who have no vested interest in, and Melba didn't have any vested interest in this, of course, other than wanting to also, like the rest of us,
right?
Settle in your own minds. Yeah, understand what we're dealing with.
That's crazy. Coming into this fresh eyes, like
Josh,
I didn't realize,
I've never told Josh about this before.
Yeah, I never realized how much scientific evidence there is suggesting. Well, I mean, it's what do we know it's suggesting, but it's very interesting to hear it from a scientific point of view, whereas it's just not just somebody saying I saw Bigfoot in the woods. It's very interesting hearing it from this.
And Josh, being our resident skeptic, this is good for him to hear.
Yeah, I still do have a couple of questions I want to ask you, especially about the tote. Actually, why? I mean, what was so difficult about the tote? Why did you think exactly it was like a man-like person? I mean, was it lockable or?
I'm sorry, Josh.
The tote. He's talking about
again?
the tote.
The tote from earlier when you were speaking about the campground. I was just wondering what made you think that it had to be a man. I mean, or a man-like thing. Like, was it lockable? Did it have like hinges or?
Oh, you mean the footprint we found?
No, before the footprint. Earlier you mentioned the campground story.
The tote by the door of the camper.
I'm sorry, it was a tote. T-O-T-E. Tote.
Yes.
It was a plastic bin, a tote. Yes. I'll tell you what, Josh. I'll tell you that the reason that it disturbed me so much is because we've had bear come in number of times around our camp. And when a bear comes in, they're looking for a food source. Now, when I camp in wilderness, I always put all the food source gets locked away inside a vehicle with the doors locked.
Okay.
Bears can open doors. So we are very good at policing our food and anything that attract in wild animals. That was something we were constantly aware of. And in this case, when a bear comes in, they crash do things. They lead with their nose. You hear them moving and sniffing and digging,
and they destroy
it's
stuff.
Very apparent it's a bear. Yeah, they're very kind of clumsy. Well, this thing came in like to experience it. It's one thing to experience it in the pitch black and you can't see and you're very vulnerable. Your family there, your kids are there. My kids were 7, 8, 10 years old. They were pretty young, and but my first thought is protecting my family. And when you think in your mind, you think it's another human being out there. Well, it's very, very disturbing. It's very scary because you're thinking if a person is waiting outside of your camp and they've been watching you set up this camp in the pitch dark, and it's almost like a serial killer, you know, like a movie you'd go see where the serial killer is hanging out just in the dark, just beyond the light, you know, the reach of the light.
Yeah.
And then when you turn your back, he's sneaking on you. Well, it was kind of like that. It was a feeling like that. Like this thing had been watching us, and I had no clue it was there. And as soon as it went black, I mean, as soon as that light went off, it wasted no time. Boom! It was right in on my camp, and it wasn't subtle. It wasn't quiet. It let us know it was there. It was like, hey, I'm in. I'm here now. I rule. The lights off. Now it's my time. And it made all that noise going down the side of my camper.
So unlike,
and then
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but unlike a bear, which would have just crashed through the camp, because I've had bears in my camp too. They were very loud and clumsy.
Yes.
When this thing got to your tote, it didn't just knock it over. It opened it with its hand.
It popped the lid open on the tote like a man would do.
Okay,
it was a simple, quick pop.
That's what I'm asking about the tote. Like, I mean, is it something that you had to lock, or is it something that was the lid was held down some way?
It was snapped in place. It had
Snapped.
Okay,
snapped.
all right,
It doesn't
yeah.
lock closed, but you have to have fingers or claws or something to, you know, and you have to know where to lift it on the end. A bear would know that, you know, it would just tear at it till it popped open.
Yeah, kind of like the trash cans
Whatever
around
this
here.
was.
It would
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
see, that's what I was
Yeah.
kind of wondering. Why was it so significant with the tote? Like, I was just wondering if it was, something that was lockable that it just ripped open, or if it was just something.
It was very subtle. Did it put the lid back down again?
So that's just it. It would be just as if almost you walked up to it, Josh, and you saw one of those plastic Walmart totes, the big 20-gallon totes, whatever size they are, and you wanted to get inside and look inside. You would reach and you'd grab both ends, and you would just pop the ends up, and then you would shuffle around inside with one hand, and then you put the lid back on and snap.
Exactly.
That's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And
Okay.
Tell me,
that's
what
weird.
animal does that?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, a bear would be 20 feet away, and the tote would be 20 feet in the other direction.
Did you ever
Exactly.
think at that moment then of speaking to it, thinking it was a person? Like, get out of my camp, or...
No, because it was almost like you weren't invited in here. What are you doing? And now that we're locked up inside, that's its territory, its domain. It's like it's doing what it wants to do at the behest of what we, you know, it doesn't care that we know, or that, you know, that we may be dangerous inside. I'm armed.
Right.
It didn't give a dang. It was just owned the night there. It was doing whatever it wanted.
But
to
if
do.
it came through that door, it
Right
was
about
going to get a sense of what you had in your hand, though. It was going to get some 357 slugs. So
And I guess
Yeah.
my second skeptical question is,
go for it.
when you
skeptic.
were at the lake on the Alpine side, when you saw the footprint, did you happen to have? I mean, how long ago was this? Like, what year?
I want to say it was either 99 or 2000, and I'm sorry, I wrote it down. It's been a while, and I can't recall the exact year, but it was 99 or 2000.
Okay.
It was in that time frame. I'll have to look at my notes.
Well, no, I mean,
have in front of me.
that kind of answers my next question. I was just wondering. I mean, nowadays everybody has a cell phone, and it's just easy to pop out, take a quick pic. So.
Well,
2000.
actually, Josh, to answer that question, I did have. We carried a video camera with us everywhere we went. I had a camcorder with a tape, the older ones back at that time. That's what we had. And since we did a lot of jeeping and wheeling, and I had a built Jeep, we video recorded a lot of the trails and the things that we would do for the day in our camping. So we actually had one on hand. And we did video record that. So I have some poor quality recording, but I have video of that day and of that occurrence.
Oh, wow.
And I also submitted a report to the BFRO, which I shortly discovered after that next following week when we came back home. I'd gone online and I found the BFRO website, submitted the report to the local Colorado investigator at the time, which I wasn't involved with them at the time. And so all that's documented. In fact, I believe it's on the public side of the website, under Leadville, Park County. I believe it was Park County, but it was near Leadville. Family has finds a large footprint at the side of the lake. So it's been documented, the time and the date, all that.
Oh, awesome.
There.
Cool.
I just
That
don't have it in front of me.
backfired on me.
He's gonna use that.
So, yeah. Anyways.
This has been extremely helpful, and I think sets kind of a baseline for being the first guest we've had on the show to actually talk about the DNA and
The scientific aspect.
The scientific aspect, not just the emotional side of Bigfoot, which we get a lot.
Or nobody telling me that the camera didn't work because
Bigfoot, my camera's
Bigfoot emits a EMP.
Yeah, exactly.
Josh, don't you know by now that the Bigfoot are endemically blurry?
Yeah,
that's why you can never get it clear.
You can't.
By
We call
nature.
it the blob squatch.
It's not.
Yeah.
That's just how they look.
That's just how they look. They're just blurry in general.
Right. So,
well, thank you for giving us time. Yeah. I know you've got other things I'm sure you're doing on the afternoon, but really appreciate you taking the time, Dennis.
It was really good speaking to you. I mean, I've learned a lot. Actually, stuff that I didn't learn. Wow.
Oh, yeah. No, I appreciate it, and thank you for taking some time and listening to our stories. What happened. It definitely, I'll tell you, it definitely changes your whole perspective and outlook on life when you get involved with this, or you have experiences like that.
Yes.
Makes you see the world in a whole different light, for sure. So.
Do you have any websites or any social media accounts you'd like to plug while we got you on the phone?
Yeah, we're I'm a member of the Colorado investigator for the BFRO, Bigfoot Field Research Organization. That can be found online, bfro.net. And then also we have our own group, which we established before I became a member of the BFRO, which is the Colorado Bigfoot Research Group. And I helped Jim out, and Jim's got his great research he has going on here in Central Colorado with the Bailey, Bailey Bigfoot. I'm sorry, Jim, your Bigfoot. The name of your store.
Sasquatch Outpost. The Sasquatch Outpost.
The Sasquatch Outpost. I go there all the time, and Jim's doing great work there too. So I help Jim out from time to time, and we hang out. So
we've been out
doing
research
all works out well
together numerous times. So yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks again.
Appreciate it, Dennis.
You're welcome. All right. Have a good day, guys.
You too.
Take care.
All right, guys. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening.
What do you think, Josh? Give you some food for thought?
I think I walked away a little leaning towards there is. I'm a believer. A little bit more now.
Just sitting across the table, his expression changed in the middle of this last interview just because he's like, wow, there is some science behind this. It's not just a bunch of kooks running around the woods looking for Bigfoot.
As always, guys, to help us out, give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you heard us from. And until next time, always remember,
you don't know Squatch.